The perfect relationship, the perfect life, the perfect lie. I never imagined that the man who proposed to me with tears in his eyes would be orchestrating my financial ruin behind my back. But when I discovered my fiancé had secretly sold my family home, the one thing that connected me to my past, I didn't just get mad, I got methodical. This is the story of how I dismantled a sophisticated con operation piece by piece and made sure the man who betrayed me lost absolutely everything. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Have you thought more about Nantucket for the wedding? Nathan asked, sliding a freshly brewed cup of coffee across our kitchen island. The Spencer estate would be perfect for a June ceremony. We could have the reception overlooking the harbor. I looked up from my laptop where I'd been reviewing notes for an upcoming litigation, momentarily distracted by the genuine warmth in Nathan's amber eyes. Even after 2 years together, that boyish smile still had a way of derailing my train of thought. June? I repeated, setting my legal pad aside. I thought we agreed on October. The Sullivan case will be in full swing by June. Nathan Wells, successful venture capitalist and the man I'd agreed to marry after an 18-month whirlwind. Romance leaned against the counter of our Boston brownstone. He was the picture of casual elegance even on a Saturday morning. Crisp linen shirt with sleeves rolled to the elbows, dark hair artfully tousled, the vintage Rolex he'd inherited from his grandfather catching the morning light. October's hurricane. Season in Nantucket, he countered smoothly. Besides, the Sullivan case will always be there, Olivia. Some things are more important. He held my gaze, his expression a perfect blend of understanding and gentle challenge. Like starting our life together. I smiled despite myself. As one of Boston's top preservation attorneys specializing in historic properties, I'd built my reputation on being tenacious and meticulous, qualities that had drawn Nathan to me when we first met at a charity auction for the Boston Historical Society. He'd outbid everyone for a private tour of the Gardner Museum with a renowned art historian, then promptly invited me as his guest. I'll think about it, I conceded, returning to my notes. But the Ashworth Manor case is right after Sullivan, and I've been working on that litigation for almost 2 years. Nathan nodded, attention drifting to his phone. Just an idea. Your call, babe. What I didn't tell him, what I hadn't told anyone, was that I'd noticed several odd transactions in my bank notifications over the past week. Small, probing withdrawals from accounts I rarely used. The kind of digital fingerprints that precede larger financial moves. I'm meeting Maddie for lunch, I said casually, closing my laptop. Wedding venue scouting, supposedly, though I suspect. It's an excuse to drink champagne before noon on a Saturday. Perfect, Nathan replied, suddenly attentive. I've got investor calls anyway. Some promising developments with that tech startup in Austin. He crossed the kitchen to kiss my forehead. Give Maddie my best. I maintained my relaxed smile, the same one I'd perfected through years of high-stakes negotiations with developers who thought they could intimidate a woman in male-dominated courtrooms. Instead of meeting Maddie, I drove to my childhood home, in Beacon Hill, a federal-style masterpiece built in 1823 that my grandmother had left to me. It was this house that had sparked my passion for historic preservation and law. The home I'd painstakingly restored room by room after passing the IE. Bar, I parked a block away, watching as a couple I didn't recognize exited my front door with a woman I immediately identified as Stephanie Patterson, one of Boston's most exclusive real estate agents. My stomach tightened as I raised my phone, using the zoom feature to capture images of them assessing the distinctive fanlight window above the front door. A window whose original glass I'd sourced from a specialized restoration craftsman in Rhode Island. This was the third showing this week, according to the discreet security system Nathan knew nothing about. My phone vibrated with a text from my investigator, Kyle. Records confirmed. Transfer of deed filed yesterday. Signature verification in progress. My hands trembled slightly as I started the car. Somehow, Nathan had managed to sell my family home, or at least was in the process of selling it. The property that wasn't even in his name. The home that wasn't part of our prenuptial agreement discussions. I drove toward downtown, calling the one person I could trust implicitly. Judge Amelia Richardson's. "Chambers," answered a crisp voice. "Rachel, it's Olivia Harrington. Is my godmother available?" Minutes later, I sat in Amelia's private chambers, the distinguished federal judge listening intently as I laid out what I'd discovered. "Forgery," Amelia stated flatly, examining the documentation I'd brought. "And sophisticated identity theft. Nathan would need access to your personal documents, digital signatures, notary connections. All of which he has," I replied quietly. I trusted him completely. Amelia's eyes, sharp after 30 years on the bench, studied my face. "What do you need from me, Olivia?" "Time," I answered, "and discretion. I need to understand how deep. This goes before I confront him." As I left the courthouse, another text from Kyle appeared. "Offshore account identified. Transfers dating back 6 months. More properties involved. Meeting at 3 p.m. to review findings." I took a deep breath, slipping my phone into my purse as I prepared to return home to Nathan. The weight of my engagement ring suddenly felt suffocating against my finger. 2 years of building a life with someone, only to discover it had all been an elaborate con. In my car, I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, composing my features into a mask of blissful ignorance. I would play the unsuspecting fiancé for a little longer, just long enough to uncover the full extent of Nathan's betrayal and ensure he never saw the retribution coming. After all, he might be a venture capitalist with wealthy connections, but I was Olivia Harrington, granddaughter of Judge Lawrence Harrington and goddaughter of Judge Amelia Richardson. I'd spent my career untangling complex property fraud and protecting historic legacies. Nathan had no idea who he was really dealing with, but he was about to find out. I arrived at Kyle's office precisely at 3 hours, having texted Nathan that my lunch with Maddie had turned into an impromptu bridal shopping expedition. His reply had been immediate. "Perfect timing. Working late tonight. Don't wait until dinner." Kyle Matthews had been my investigator on numerous property fraud cases. A former cybersecurity specialist for the Department of Justice, he now worked exclusively for a select clientele, mostly law firms and high-net-worth individuals concerned about privacy breaches. "The identity theft is sophisticated," Kyle began. Without preamble, his office deliberately minimalist except for 4 monitors displaying various data streams. "Nathan created digital duplicates of your signature starting approximately 8 months ago, beginning with minor documents." My throat tightened. 8 months ago, right after I'd introduced Nathan to my family at Thanksgiving. Right after he'd proposed with the vintage sapphire ring that had supposedly belonged to his grandmother. "Show me everything," I instructed, setting my purse aside and taking the seat beside him. For the next 2 hours, Kyle methodically revealed Nathan's elaborate scheme. Multiple shell companies created in Wyoming and Nevada. A sophisticated network of transactions moving money through increasingly obscure channels. Falsified powers of attorney. And most disturbingly, a pattern of similar activities stretching back years before I'd even met him. "He's done this before," I said quietly, staring at the evidence of at least 2 previous long-term relationships that had ended with significant property transfers. Kyle nodded grimly. Sarah Donovan in Seattle, Melissa Camden in Chicago, both successful professionals with significant real estate holdings or inheritances. Both relationships lasted approximately 2 years before major assets were liquidated. "And both women?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. Donovan suffered a complete professional breakdown, resigned from her architectural firm, later filed for bankruptcy. Camden fought back legally, but the documentation was seemingly ironclad. She lost everything in legal fees before eventually settling. I scrolled through the financial trails, recognizing the sophisticated layering that kept Nathan's name officially disconnected from the transactions, while ensuring he ultimately controlled the proceeds. "What about offshore accounts?" I asked. Kyle pulled up another screen. "Cayman Islands initially, then Singapore currently. He's routing most funds through a complex structure in Liechtenstein. We've identified approximately $12.7 million in holdings." My mind reeled. The Beacon Hill home was worth nearly $4.5 million after my renovations. Where had the other $8 million come from? "There's more," Kyle continued. "He's been systematically accessing your client files. Most recently, the Sullivan case and Ashworth Manor litigation. Both properties with 8-figure valuations. The same properties I'd mentioned at breakfast." The timing of Nathan's wedding acceleration suddenly made perfect sense. He needed to secure marital access to my professional dealings before I discovered the theft of my home. "The Sullivan closing is in 3 weeks," I murmured. "The Ashworth litigation settlement is likely by the end of summer. Combined liquidity of approximately $30 million. I rose and paced the office, my legal mind automatically cataloging statutes violated, potential charges, jurisdictional complexities. But beneath the professional analysis, a cold fury was building. "There's something else you should see," Kyle said quietly, pulling up surveillance footage. "This is from your house yesterday afternoon." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The video showed Nathan giving a personal tour to Stephanie Patterson and an older man I didn't recognize. Nathan moved through my grandmother's home with proprietary confidence, pointing out original features, discussing renovation potential as if he'd personally overseen the restorations I'd spent years completing. "Who's the man?" I asked, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "Robert Thornton, real estate developer known for gutting historic properties and building luxury condominiums." The final piece clicked into place. Nathan wasn't just stealing my house, he was planning to destroy it. "I need copies of everything," I said, returning to my seat. "And I need to know who else is involved." Nathan couldn't have managed all the legal documentation himself, even with digital forgeries. Kyle pulled up another file. "We've identified a paralegal at Morrison & Frost who processed most of the paperwork. Thomas Patterson. Stephanie Patterson's husband," I realized. "They're working together." Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. "Closing in on a big deal. Staying at the office tonight. Love you." I stared at the message, a plan already forming. Nathan had given me the perfect opportunity. "I need immediate access to our brownstone," I told Kyle. "Tonight?" Kyle raised an eyebrow. "You're not confronting him yet?" "No," I replied, gathering my notes. "First, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with, and I need to secure what's mine before he realizes I know." As I prepared to leave, Kyle asked the question that had been hanging between us. "What's your endgame here, Olivia? Criminal charges? Civil suit?" I paused at the door, thinking of the 2 women whose lives Nathan had previously destroyed. Of my grandmother's carefully preserved home, now destined for demolition. Of the trust I'd placed in the man I'd agreed to marry. "Justice," I answered simply. "Complete and inescapable justice." Outside, twilight had fallen over Boston. I checked my appearance in my car's mirror, ensuring no trace of my discoveries showed on my face. For the next few days, I would need to maintain the illusion of the unsuspecting fiancé while I executed the first phase of my counterattack. After all, Nathan wasn't just committing fraud against me. He was attempting it against 2 of the wealthiest estates in the city, both under my professional care. He had no idea that in targeting me, he'd chosen an adversary uniquely positioned to destroy him. The security panel in our brownstone beeped softly as I entered the space. Dark, except for the ambient city lights filtering through tall windows. I moved silently through our shared home, now seeing it through entirely new eyes, no longer as our space, but as Nathan's staged backdrop. I headed directly to his home office, the one room he'd insisted remain his private domain. Investment. Privacy, he'd explained when we moved in together. I'd respected that boundary, until now. The office door featured a biometric lock, but I'd prepared for this. From my purse, I extracted a silicone cast of Nathan's right thumbprint, created from a wine glass he'd used at dinner last week, back when I'd first noticed the suspicious bank notifications and had begun taking precautions. The lock clicked. Open. Inside, the minimalist space reflected Nathan's carefully curated image, expensive yet understated furniture, abstract art selected by the designer he'd hired, credentials displayed just prominently enough to impress without seeming ostentatious. Went straight to his desk, powering on his secondary laptop, the one he believed I didn't know existed. The password prompt appeared, but Kyle had already provided me with the keystroke capture data from the spyware he'd installed remotely yesterday. While the computer booted up, I methodically photographed the contents of his desk drawers, filing, cabinet, and safe, combination acquired months ago when Nathan mumbled it in his sleep. Everything appeared meticulously organized, almost too perfect, like his entire persona. The laptop yielded immediate results. Unlike his primary computer, this one contained the real records of his operation. Spreadsheets tracking assets targeted, timeline projections, communications with accomplices. I connected an encrypted drive Kyle had provided and began copying everything. A folder labeled Harrington Properties contained detailed files not just on my Beacon Hill home, but on several other family properties I'd inherited. Smaller investments my parents had purchased before their fatal sailing accident. Properties I rarely discussed, that weren't publicly connected to me. "How did you know about these?" I whispered, scrolling through detailed valuation assessments. The answer appeared in another folder. O Communications. My emails, text messages, phone logs, all meticulously archived and annotated. He'd been monitoring me from the beginning, harvesting every casual mention of family assets, every professional connection, every potential resource. My hands trembled, slightly, but I continued methodically documenting everything I found. In a hidden partition, I discovered the template documents used for creating falsified powers of attorney, property transfers, and financial authorizations, complete with progressively refined versions of my digital signature. In his physical safe, behind investment statements and insurance policies, I found a USB drive containing what appeared to be his contingency plans, exit strategies, identity documents, and overseas contact information. Most disturbing were files on his previous targets, Sarah and Melissa, containing intimate photographs, personal journals, and psychological assessments. He hadn't just stolen their assets. He'd studied them, learned their vulnerabilities, customized his approach to each woman. My phone vibrated with a text from Kyle. "Patterson meeting Thornton tomorrow morning. Demolition permits already being prepared. They were moving quickly." Too quickly, another text followed. "Nathan's primary phone GPS shows movement, heading toward Brownstone." I froze, checking the timestamp. Nathan was supposed to be working all night. Why was he returning early? Working swiftly, I completed the data transfer, carefully returned everything to its precise position, and exited the office. The biometric lock re-engaged with a soft click. I hurried to the master bathroom, turning on the shower and stripping off my clothes just as I heard the front door unlock. Stepping under the hot water, I forced my breathing to normalize, my mind racing to process what I'd discovered while preparing to play my role. "Olivia?" Nathan called, his voice echoing through the apartment. "In the shower," I replied, injecting just the right amount of surprise in my tone. "I thought you were working late." The bathroom door opened, releasing steam as Nathan's silhouette appeared. "Deal wrapped up earlier than expected," he explained, loosening his tie. "Thought I'd surprise you." I smiled through the glass shower door, wondering if he'd returned because something had triggered his suspicion. "Lucky me. How was your day?" Nathan leaned against the vanity, sharing carefully constructed details about his fictional deal while I rinsed shampoo from my hair. Maintaining the performance of normalcy, behind my attentive expression, I was cataloging the evidence I'd discovered, formulating next steps, identifying the legal vulnerabilities in his scheme. "You seem distracted," he observed as I stepped out of the shower, wrapping myself in a plush towel. "Everything okay with Maddie and the wedding planning?" I manufactured a small sigh. "Just work stress. The Sullivan estate is more complicated than expected. I may need to push back on that June wedding idea, make it August instead." Something flickered in his eyes. Calculation. Recalibration. "Whatever works best for you, babe. No rush." Liar. Every move was calculated, every timeline, precisely engineered for maximum extraction before discovery. That night, as Nathan slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, mentally revising my counterattack. I needed to move faster than anticipated, but couldn't risk alerting him. Tomorrow I would implement the first phase of my response while continuing to play the unsuspecting fiancé. Nathan Wells had spent years perfecting his predatory operation, but he'd made one catastrophic miscalculation. He'd chosen a victim whose professional life had been built on understanding property fraud, whose family connections permeated the legal system, and whose determination now bordered on ruthless. As I finally drifted toward sleep, one thought crystallizes with perfect clarity. When this was over, Nathan wouldn't just lose his ill-gotten gains, he would lose everything. Morning arrived with Nathan already gone, a note on his pillow explaining he had an early client breakfast. I knew exactly which client he was meeting: Robert Thornton, the developer planning to demolish my family home. I dressed carefully in one of my most imposing courtroom suits, a tailored navy Armani with subtle pinstripes, and headed not to my office but to Morrison & Frost, one of the city's most prestigious law firms. "Ms. Harrington," greeted Catherine Morrison herself, rising from behind her desk as I was shown into her corner office overlooking Boston Harbor. "This is unexpected." "I apologize for the short notice," I replied, setting my briefcase on the polished conference table. "But this matter requires immediate attention and absolute discretion." Catherine gestured to the leather chairs. At 65, she remained one of the sharpest legal minds in Massachusetts, her silver hair cut in a precise bob that complemented her reputation for meticulous precision. "I understand you've recently processed several property transfers through your paralegal Thomas Patterson," I began, removing a folder from my briefcase. Catherine's expression didn't change, but her posture stiffened slightly. "Thomas handles numerous transactions. Which ones specifically interest you?" I slid the documentation across the table. "The fraudulent ones involving my properties, falsified using my forged signature." For 10 minutes, I methodically presented the evidence Kyle had compiled, explaining the elaborate scheme orchestrated by Nathan, facilitated by Thomas Patterson, and executed through Patterson's wife, Stephanie. "If accurate, this represents a significant liability for our firm," Catherine noted, her tone measured as she examined the documents. "It's worse than that," I replied, producing another file. "Patterson has been involved in similar falsifications for at least 3 other major clients, all vulnerable to Nathan's specific targeting criteria: successful professional women with substantial real estate holdings, minimal family connections, and high-value client portfolios." Catherine's eyes narrowed. A woman who had built her reputation. In the male-dominated legal world of the 1980s, she understood precisely what I was describing. "Patterson was hired on recommendation from James Wilson," I continued, referencing one of the firm's senior partners. I believe Wilson may be receiving kickbacks for providing legal cover to these operations. That's a serious accusation against my partner, Ms. Harrington. One I can substantiate, I countered, producing financial records showing irregular payments to offshore accounts connected to Wilson. The question isn't whether this happened, Catherine. The question is how you'll respond now that you know. Catherine Morrison hadn't become one of the most powerful attorneys in Boston by being easily intimidated. She studied me carefully before responding. What exactly are you proposing? A coordinated response that protects your firm's reputation. While ensuring justice is served, I explained, I need access to all documentation processed by Patterson, Wilson's complete client list for the past 5 years, and your firm's cooperation with a discreet investigation led by Judge Richardson. Catherine raised an eyebrow. Amelia Richardson? The federal judge? My godmother, I confirmed, who is particularly interested in white-collar crime targeting professional women. For several minutes, Catherine considered her options. I waited, patiently, knowing she was calculating potential damage to her firm against the benefits of alliance with a federal judge. What happens to Nathan Wells in this scenario? She finally asked. Justice, I replied simply. Complete and proportionate. Catherine nodded once, decision made. Patterson will be suspended pending investigation as of this afternoon. You'll have everything by the close of business today. And Wilson will be handled appropriately once we've secured all evidence, I finished for her. As I prepared to leave, Catherine asked the question I'd been expecting. Why come to me directly? You could have gone straight to the authorities. I turned at the door. Because 25 years ago, when my mother was starting her career, you mentored her. Because you understand what it means to build something meaningful only to have men attempt to take it from you. And because I need allies who recognize this isn't just about property theft, it's about predators who systematically target successful women. Catherine's expression softened fractionally. Your mother would be proud of your approach, Olivia. Methodical, thorough, and giving your opponent just enough rope. From Morrison and Frost, I went directly to my next strategic alliance. Beth Thornton, Robert's estranged wife, and a prominent city council member who had spent decades fighting against developers like her husband. We met in a private room at the Women's Club, where her grandmother and mine had both been founding members. Robert's involved in another historic demolition, Beth confirmed, her expression hardening as I outlined what I'd discovered. That vindictive bastard knows exactly how much I care about preservation. He's meeting with Nathan this morning, I explained. They're accelerating the timeline. Beth pulled out her phone. My director handles the preservation board that still controls 30% of Robert's permit approvals. Consider demolition permits blocked indefinitely. By noon, I had secured commitments from Catherine Morrison, Beth Thornton, and 3 other strategically positioned allies, each with personal reasons to support my cause, each with resources crucial to my plan. My phone buzzed with a text from Kyle. GPS tracker shows Nathan heading to Beacon Hill again. Meeting with Thornton just ended abruptly. Something had changed. I needed to move faster. I parked 3 blocks from my Beacon Hill home, using the service entrance of a neighboring property owned by an old family friend. Through their garden, I accessed the hidden pathway that connected to my backyard. Remnant from Prohibition days when these mansions shared secret access routes. From dense shrubbery, I watched Nathan pacing my back terrace, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing emphatically. Even without hearing his words, his agitation was evident. Something had disrupted his carefully orchestrated plan. My phone vibrated with an encrypted message from Catherine Morrison. Patterson suspended. Electronic access revoked. Security escorting him out now. Wilson being monitored. That explained Nathan's distress. His legal facilitator had just lost access, likely triggering internal security protocols at Morrison and Frost. The timeline had accelerated beyond his control. Nathan disappeared inside my house. my house, and I used the opportunity to slip into the garden shed where I'd installed a secondary surveillance hub years ago. The monitors flickered to life, showing Nathan frantically searching through my grandmother's antique desk, rifling through drawers he had no right to touch. I activated the audio feed. "Don't care what it takes," Nathan was saying into his phone. "If Patterson doesn't have access, find someone else who does. We need those documents finalized before she—" The door chime interrupted him. On the monitor, I watched Robert Thornton enter without waiting for an invitation, his expression thunderous. "The permits are blocked," Thornton announced without preamble. "Every single one." Nathan froze. "That's impossible. Your contact guaranteed." "My wife," Thornton cut in, "has apparently taken sudden interest in this property's historical significance. The Preservation Board received an emergency petition this morning with 300 signatures, including from the mayor's wife." Nathan's carefully controlled facade cracked momentarily, revealing the calculating predator beneath. "This is a temporary setback. We can refile under—" "My investors are already nervous about the accelerated timeline," Thornton interrupted again. "Now, with permit delays and Beth involved, they're threatening to pull out entirely." "They can't back out now. The transfer is already—" "Is it?" Thornton challenged. "Because my sources at the county records office say there's an authentication. Hold on all recently filed deeds connected to a paralegal named Patterson." I watched Nathan's face pale slightly before he forced a confident smile. "Minor clerical issue. It'll be resolved by tomorrow." "It better be," Thornton warned. "I've already committed significant capital based on your guarantees." After Thornton left, Nathan made 3 more increasingly desperate calls. To his contact at the county records office, to Stephanie Patterson, and finally to someone he referred to only as the cleaner. This last conversation used coded language about removing complications and ensuring complete transfer that sent a chill through me. I needed to accelerate my own plans. Nathan was growing desperate, and desperate predators were unpredictable. I slipped out the way I'd come, driving directly to the secure office where Amelia Richardson was coordinating our legal response. "Nathan's panicking," I reported, showing Amelia and Kyle the surveillance footage. "He mentioned a cleaner who handles complications." Amelia's expression darkened. "This matches patterns from his previous operations. When Sarah Donovan fought back, her home suffered a suspicious fire that destroyed her documentation. When Melissa Camden refused to vacate her Chicago property, she experienced a break-in where only her legal papers were taken. We need to secure everything," I decided. "Not just documentation, but all my assets, client files, everything connected to the Sullivan and Ashworth estates." For the next hour, we executed an emergency protocol. Digital files transferred to secure servers, physical documents moved to Judge Richardson's chambers, emergency filings prepared to freeze all transactions connected to my properties. "What? About personal safety?" Kyle asked quietly, after Amelia stepped out to make calls. I considered his question seriously. "Additional security at the brownstone. And I need a secure way to gather final evidence without alerting Nathan." Kyle handed me a small case. "Upgraded surveillance. These look like regular jewelry, but capture everything. Audio, video, geolocation." Inside were diamond earrings, a watch, and a pendant, all containing sophisticated recording technology. "The watch is particularly important," Kyle explained. "It has a panic button feature. Press 3 times if you're in danger." I checked my phone as another message arrived, this one from Beth Thornton. "Robert is furious, threatening to contact alternate buyers, mentioned investment group from overseas. Nathan was scrambling to salvage his operation, reaching out to backup resources." I needed to discover who these connections were before they emerged as unexpected threats. "We need complete surveillance on Thornton," I told Kyle. "If Nathan approaches new buyers, we need to know who they are." As I prepared to leave, Amelia returned, her expression grave. The forensic accountant found something disturbing, she said, placing a folder on the table. The money trail from Nathan's previous victims doesn't end with offshore accounts. It continues to be a network of shell companies connected to organized crime operations. Nathan isn't just a con man. He's potentially laundering money for something much bigger. I absorbed this information, recalibrating my understanding of exactly who I was dealing with. This wasn't just about my house, or even Nathan's pattern, of targeting successful women. This was potentially part of a sophisticated criminal enterprise. Does this change our approach? I asked Amelia. It means we proceed even more carefully, she replied. But it also means when we move against him, we'll have federal resources available. I nodded, standing to leave. Then we continue as planned. Tonight, I need to maintain the illusion that nothing has changed. Tonight, I would return home to Nathan, pretend I knew nothing of his scheme, and extract whatever information I could about his contacts, his backup plans, and most importantly, this mysterious cleaner. With each piece of evidence I gathered, the noose around his neck would tighten, and soon it would be time to make it clear to him exactly who he'd tried to destroy. I returned to our brownstone at precisely 7:15 p.m., the time I typically arrived home on Tuesdays. Everything about my entrance needed to appear routine, from the sound of my keys in the door to the slight sigh as I set down my briefcase. Nathan was waiting with an opened bottle of my favorite Pinot Noir, his smile practiced yet strained around the edges. The dining table was elegantly set with the Italian pottery we'd purchased in Tuscany, the trip where he'd first mentioned marriage. Special occasion? I asked, accepting the glass he offered. Just appreciating my beautiful fiancé, he replied, kissing my cheek. You've been working so hard lately. The pendant camera captured his expression as he pulled away, calculating, assessing, searching for any sign that I suspected him. I returned his smile with practiced ease, years of high-stakes negotiations making me adept at controlling my micro-expressions. This is lovely, I said, gesturing to the table, but unexpected. I thought you were working late again. Change of plans, Nathan explained, returning to the kitchen where something simmered on the stove. Market volatility created some unexpected opportunities. I closed a major position this afternoon. Translation: his scheme was imploding, and he needed to accelerate his contingency plans. Congratulations, I replied, slipping off my jacket. Though I admit I'm exhausted. The Sullivan estate situation became complicated today. Nathan's stirring paused fractionally. Complications? Nothing serious, I hope. I shrugged, crafting my answer carefully. Some questions about deed transfers and property rights. Nothing I can't handle, but the closing might be delayed. The Sullivan estate represented potential access to over $18 million in liquid assets, a significant component of what Nathan hoped to control through our marriage. A delay threatened his timeline. How long a delay? He asked, his tone casual, while his eyes remained sharp. Hard to say. Could be a week, could be a month. I sipped my wine. Actually, it might affect our wedding plans if this drags on. June might be impossible. I watched him recalibrate in real time, adjusting his approach based on this new information. His smile remained fixed while his mind clearly raced through contingencies. Whatever works best, he said finally. I just want you to be happy. Throughout dinner, I maintained the delicate balance between normalcy and strategic information gathering. Each question I asked was carefully constructed to seem innocent while designed to extract specific details. How's Stephanie's real estate business? I inquired midway through the meal. Didn't you mention she was handling that property in Beacon Hill? Nathan's fork paused halfway to his mouth. I think she mentioned something about that. Market's competitive there. My grandmother's federal is in that neighborhood. I should have her assess its value sometime, purely out of curiosity. His expression flickered, concern, calculation, then forced casualness. Real estate isn't always the best investment. Markets fluctuate. True, I conceded. But some properties have sentimental value that transcends market considerations. I could never part with that house. Too many memories. Nathan reached for the wine bottle, refilling my glass perhaps too generously. Sometimes nostalgia costs us opportunities. Speaking of which, what if we considered a destination wedding? Amalfi Coast, perhaps? We could leave as soon as next week for venue scouting. The sudden shift wasn't subtle. He wanted me out of the country, away from my properties, my clients, my support network. That sounds wonderful, I lied smoothly. Though I'd need to sort out the Sullivan situation first. Judge Richardson is overseeing aspects of it personally. The mention of Amelia's involvement visibly unsettled him. Richardson? The federal judge? Why would she be involved in a simple estate matter? I explained how Amelia had taken special interest in the case given certain irregularities, watching Nathan's knuckles whiten around his wine glass. Mentioning Amelia wasn't just strategic, it was warning him that powerful figures were already paying attention. After dinner, as we moved to the living room, Nathan's phone chimed with what appeared to be an urgent message. He glanced at it, his expression darkening momentarily before he excused himself to make a call. In his brief absence, I placed a tiny surveillance device beneath the credenza in his office, the final component needed to complete our monitoring grid. When he returned, his manner had subtly shifted from romantic to businesslike. I hate to do this, he began, but there's an emerging situation with European markets I need to handle tonight. I feigned disappointment while inwardly celebrating this unexpected opportunity. Don't worry about me. I have briefs to review anyway. As soon as Nathan left, I activated all recording devices and messaged Kyle. Target has left premises. Operation. Safeguard is active. Within 20 minutes, a discreet team arrived to create comprehensive documentation of everything in our shared home. Photographing documents, cloning devices, cataloging evidence. Meanwhile, I compiled a detailed inventory of my personal possessions, particularly family heirlooms and irreplaceable items. Nathan's heading to the Beacon Club, Kyle reported via secure line. Meeting someone named Hargrove. The name triggered immediate recognition. Victor Hargrove, rumored connection to international money laundering operations. If Nathan was meeting him directly, the situation had escalated beyond property fraud. As Kyle's team completed their work, I made one final call to Amelia. We've identified the cleaner, she informed me. Jason Ryder, former military contractor, specializes in document destruction and digital forensics. Currently on a flight to Boston, arriving tomorrow morning. Time was running out faster than anticipated. Nathan wasn't just trying to steal my property, he was preparing to eliminate all evidence that might implicate him. Implement protocol checkmate, I instructed Kyle as the team departed. We move tomorrow. Dawn broke with a text from Nathan. Early meeting with international clients. See you tonight for dinner. Perfect timing. I dressed quickly in a charcoal suit and pearl earrings containing Kyle's most sophisticated recording technology, then headed, not to my office, but to the private banking division of First Atlantic Trust. Ms. Harrington, greeted William Taylor, the bank's silver-haired executive vice president. Judge Richardson mentioned you might be visiting us. Taylor ushered me into a private conference room where an array of documents awaited my signature. For the next hour, I executed a series of financial maneuvers designed to protect my assets while creating a convincing illusion for Nathan. These accounts will appear active but actually function as honeypots, Taylor explained, indicating a set of newly created decoys. Any access attempts will be logged and traced without alerting the intruder. And the Sullivan and Ashworth estate funds? Already secured under the judicial protection order Judge Richardson issued last night. The financial architecture is quite elegant. From the outside, everything appears normal, but any attempt to transfer or access funds triggers immediate security protocols. I signed the final authorization, then asked the crucial question, What about Nathan's accounts? Taylor slid a folder across the polished table. As you suspected, he's been moving substantial sums offshore throughout the past week. However, his most recent transfers have encountered unexpected complications. I reviewed the documentation, showing how Nathan's attempts to move millions had been subtly redirected into monitored holding accounts. A sophisticated financial trap Amelia had helped orchestrate through her federal connections. He doesn't realize it yet, Taylor continued, but he's effectively locked himself out of approximately $9 million. And Hargrove's involvement? Taylor's expression tightened. That's where this extends beyond civil fraud. The Treasury Department is now monitoring all transactions between Wells and Hargrove-connected entities. They've identified patterns consistent with international money laundering. This confirmed my suspicions about Nathan's operation extending beyond simple property theft. He wasn't just stealing from women like me, he was potentially part of a sophisticated criminal network. From the bank, I proceeded to the county recorder's office, where Madison Chen, the chief registrar and my former law school classmate, waited with another set of critical documents. The authentication hold worked perfectly, Madison explained, spreading property records across her desk. Nathan's attempt to transfer your Beacon Hill home created a digital tripwire. Every property transaction he's touched in the past 3 years is now flagged for review. What about the current deed status? Madison smiled tightly. Officially, the property remains registered to you. The falsified transfer triggered automatic verification protocols I implemented last year after that real estate fraud case in Brookline. Nathan's paperwork is essentially suspended in bureaucratic limbo, and Thornton's development plans officially on hold pending historical review by the Preservation Board, Madison confirmed, which coincidentally is chaired by Beth Thornton this quarter. I signed the necessary affidavits confirming the forgery allegations, which would initiate a formal investigation into all parties involved in the fraudulent transfer. By mid-morning, I had secured my financial assets, protected my properties, and initiated formal investigations into Nathan's activities, all without him realizing his carefully constructed scheme was unraveling. My next destination was the offices of Sentinel Security, where Kyle had established our operational headquarters. The moment I entered, I knew something had changed. The energy in the room was different, more urgent, more focused. We've identified the cleaner, Kyle announced without preamble. Jason Ryder, former military intelligence, dishonorable discharge after allegations of evidence tampering in Afghanistan. Currently works as a digital crisis consultant for wealthy clients with problematic situations. Kyle displayed Ryder's surveillance photos on the main screen, a nondescript man in his 40s with military short hair and calculating eyes. He landed at Logan 90 minutes ago, Kyle continued. Currently checked into the Four Seasons under the name James Smith. He's scheduled to meet Nathan at your Beacon Hill home at 2 p.m. This accelerated our timeline considerably. Whatever Nathan planned to clean, it would happen today, do I? We have audio surveillance prepared at the house? I asked. Better than that, Kyle replied, pulling up a schematic of my Beacon Hill home. We've implemented complete coverage, audio, video, thermal imaging. If they whisper so much as whisper, we capture it. Rachel Cho, the assistant district attorney Amelia had brought into our confidence, stepped forward with a document bearing an official seal. Judge Richardson secured federal authorization for the surveillance, she explained. Everything we collect will be admissible, provided we maintain proper chain of custody. I reviewed the operational details, noting how Kyle had coordinated with law enforcement to ensure our evidence gathering remained legally unassailable while maximizing our strategic advantage. What about Hargrove? I asked, turning to the international aspect of Nathan's scheme. Kyle pulled up another file, this one marked with federal designations. The Treasury Department has authorized us to share limited information. Hargrove appears to be using Nathan and others like him to convert illegally, obtained funds into seemingly legitimate real estate assets, making Nathan not just a con man but potentially an accessory to international money laundering, Rachel added, which significantly increases potential charges and sentencing guidelines. I checked my watch. 11:30 a.m. Nathan would meet his cleaner in less than 3 hours, providing us the final evidence needed to complete our case against him. Set up the command center at my Beacon Hill home, I instructed. I want to be on site when they arrive. By 1:30 p.m., we had transformed the carriage house behind my Beacon Hill home into a sophisticated surveillance command center. Multiple monitors displayed feeds from cameras strategically placed throughout the main house, while a small team of technical specialists monitored recording equipment and maintained secure connections to Amelia's chambers and Rachel's office. Audio calibration complete, reported Vanessa, Kyle's top surveillance expert. We've got crystal clear pickup in every room, even with whispered conversations. I studied the property's thermal imaging display, which showed no heat signatures. Inside the main house. Entry point secured? I asked. All doors and windows are under monitoring, Kyle confirmed. They'll register any access attempt, but we've ensured nothing appears obviously secured. The house looks exactly as Nathan expects it to. At 1:45, the first alert sounded, a vehicle approaching the property. The black Escalade circled once before parking half a block away. Through high-powered lenses, we watched Jason Ryder conduct a methodical perimeter check of my property, scanning for surveillance equipment with a handheld device that fortunately wasn't sophisticated enough to detect our military-grade systems. He's good, Kyle observed. Ex-intelligence training is evident in his approach pattern. At 1:55, a second vehicle appeared. Nathan's Tesla, parking directly in front of the house with the confident entitlement of someone who believed he owned the property. Through our directional microphones, we captured his phone conversation as he exited the car. I'm here now, Nathan said to someone. Yes, everything's prepared. No, she doesn't suspect anything. The Sullivan estate access is still on schedule. I understand the timeline acceleration. Yes, sir. Ryder approached from his surveillance position, and the two men exchanged terse greetings before Nathan used a key he had no legitimate right to possess, to enter my home. Recording all of this? I confirmed with Rachel, who represented our law enforcement component. Every moment, she affirmed. Unlawful entry established. Conspiracy in progress. Inside my house, Nathan led Ryder to my grandmother's study, the heart of the home, where family documents had been kept for generations. Primary target is here, Nathan explained, gesturing to the antique secretary desk. We need all property, documentation removed and digital backups located. She maintains redundant systems. Alarm systems? Hidden security? Ryder asked, surveying the room with professional detachment. Disabled, Nathan replied with unearned confidence. I've had access to the property for months. Security codes haven't changed since we started dating. What Nathan didn't know was that I'd maintained a completely separate security system he'd never discovered, one now feeding directly to our surveillance operation. What about digital evidence? Ryder asked, unfolding specialized equipment from a compact case. Nathan moved to my grandmother's painting, a Mary Cassatt-inspired garden scene that concealed a wall safe. Primary target is behind here. Safe combination is 164207. I watched, stomach tightening, as Nathan casually opened my family safe, something I'd never shown him, never discussed. The violation felt intensely personal, beyond the legal implications. How did he get the combination? Rachel whispered. He must have watched me open it, I realized. There's a reflection in the grandfather clock glass if you stand at the right angle. Inside the safe, Nathan removed the original deed to the Beacon Hill property, surveys, and historical documentation establishing the home's provenance and value. These are the originals, Nathan explained to Ryder. They need to disappear completely, and there should be digital backup drives as well. Ryder methodically photographed each document before placing them in an evidence bag. What about insurance documentation? Secondary target, Nathan replied, moving to my grandmother's desk, along with historical appraisals and conservation easement paperwork. For the next 45 minutes, we documented how the two men systematically located and removed every piece of documentation connecting me to my family home: original deeds, insurance policies, tax records, historical designations, and family photographs showing generations of Harringtons in the federal-style house. "This is beyond property theft," Rachel murmured. "This is identity erasure." She was right. Nathan wasn't just stealing my house. He was attempting to eradicate my very connection to it, eliminating the evidence that bound my family history to the property. "What about her law office?" Ryder asked as they finished with the home documentation. "That's Phase 2, Nathan replied, checking his watch. "We have a narrow window tomorrow morning while she's in court. Patterson is handling access." "Patterson has been compromised," Ryder stated flatly. "My sources confirm he was escorted from Morrison and Frost yesterday." Nathan's expression darkened. "That's impossible. He would have warned me." "His credentials were revoked, digital access terminated, building privileges suspended," Ryder continued dispassionately. "We need alternate access to her professional documentation." Through the high-resolution camera, I could see the calculation in Nathan's eyes as he processed this setback. "I can access her home computer tonight," he decided. "She keeps client backup files there." "Inefficient," Ryder objected. "Too many variables with her present." "I'll handle it," Nathan insisted. "I've been managing her for 3 years. One more night is nothing." The casual confidence with which he discussed managing me sent ice through my veins. 3 years of my life with a man who viewed our entire relationship as nothing more than an extended con operation. "They're moving to the basement," Vanessa reported, as the thermal signatures shifted downward. In my home cellar, Nathan showed Ryder the wine room concealing a secondary storage area where family archives were kept. Historical photographs, journals, and memorabilia documenting the Harrington family's connection to the house since the 1890s. "All of this needs to go," Nathan instructed. "Complete removal. When we're done, there should be no evidence the Harrington family ever owned this property." "Scorched earth approach," Ryder noted. "Expensive." Nathan's reply chilled me. Hargrove doesn't care about expense. He cares about clean assets with no complications. For nearly 2 hours, we documented as Nathan and Ryder methodically violated my home, collecting and cataloging every document that established my ownership. Their thoroughness was both impressive and disturbing. They located hidden storage areas, identified concealed safes, and systematically removed generations of Harrington family history. "We're approaching the decision point," Kyle noted, checking his watch. "Do we intervene now, or allow them to leave with the documentation?" Rachel and I exchanged glances, silently calculating risk factors. If we stop them now, we catch them. Red-handed with my documents, I reasoned. But if we let them leave, we potentially trace them to other conspirators. "Tracking devices are active on both vehicles," Vanessa confirmed. "We've also placed trackers within the document cases themselves." "Let them complete their operation," I decided. "We need to identify everyone involved, not just catch Nathan and his cleaner." We watched as the men finished their systematic purge of my home. "Final sweep complete," Ryder announced, closing his specialized equipment case. "Property documentation has been secured, digital evidence located and removed." Nathan surveyed the study, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Good. Phase 1 complete. Tomorrow we will handle her office files, then accelerate the Hargrove timeline." Rachel's eyebrows rose at this explicit mention, her hand already reaching for her secure phone to update federal authorities monitoring the Hargrove connection. "What's our extraction plan?" Ryder asked, all business. "You take the documentation to the processing location," Nathan instructed. I'll return to normal activities to maintain cover. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. sharp, we meet at her law office. Security access has been arranged through alternate channels. As they prepared to leave, Nathan paused at my grandmother's portrait above the fireplace, casually removing it from the wall. "Clients appreciate authentic period pieces," he remarked, wrapping the painting in a protective covering. "This adds another 100,000 to the property package." The casual theft of my grandmother's portrait, painted by a renowned artist, when she'd received her first judicial appointment, crystallized everything about Nathan's character. Not content with stealing my home and erasing my family's connection to it, he was now plundering personal treasures for additional profit. Once both men had left the property, our team shifted into high-precision tracking mode. Vanessa monitored the GPS signals from both vehicles while Kyle coordinated with federal agents who had been strategically positioned around the city. "Ryder is heading north on Starro Drive," Vanessa reported. "Nathan is returning downtown, likely to your brownstone." I checked my watch, nearly 5 p.m. I needed to maintain my cover for a few more hours, pretending I suspected nothing while our evidence collection operation reached its conclusion. "Rachel, you coordinate with the federal task force on Riders. Destination," I instructed. "Kyle maintains surveillance on Nathan. I need to return home and play my role one last time." Before departing, I walked through my violated home, cataloging what had been taken, what remained, what had been disturbed. In the study, empty spaces on walls marked where family photographs had hung for generations. The antique secretary desk stood open, drawers emptied of their contents. "We'll recover everything," Rachel promised, seeing my expression. "It's not just about recovery," I replied quietly. "It's about justice, complete justice." On my secure drive back to the brownstone, Amelia called with an update. "Federal agents are monitoring Ryder's movement to a warehouse in Cambridge," she reported. "Treasury Department has authorized a surveillance operation based on the Hargrove connection. They'll maintain distance until we've gathered maximum evidence and Nathan's financial movements are completely mapped." "What about the accounts?" I asked, navigating through evening traffic. "The honeypot accounts show multiple access attempts in the past hour," Amelia confirmed. "He's trying to consolidate funds, likely preparing for rapid departure once the property transaction completes." I arrived at our brownstone at my usual time, mentally preparing for perhaps the most challenging performance of my life. Inside, Nathan had prepared an intimate dinner setting, candles, wine, music, all designed to manipulate and distract. "There's my beautiful fiancé," he greeted, kissing my cheek as if he hadn't spent the afternoon systematically erasing my family history. "I've been thinking about our conversation regarding a destination wedding. What about moving forward next week? I've made some calls. We could fly to Positano on Monday." His urgency was now transparent. He needed me out of the country while his cleaner completed the evidence removal and the property transfer finalized. "That sounds lovely," I replied, maintaining my role while the recording devices in my jewelry captured every word, though I'd need to address some client matters first. "Business will always be there, Olivia," Nathan interrupted smoothly. "Some things are more important. Us, for instance." He poured wine with practiced charm, his expression betraying nothing of his afternoon activities. Meanwhile, my phone silently vibrated with updates from our surveillance team. Ryder arrived at Cambridge Warehouse. Federal agents confirmed the location as a document processing facility linked to 3 previous identity theft operations. Nathan's laptop accessed remotely. Downloading encrypted communications with the Hargrove organization, Judge Richardson, has secured federal warrants for all identified conspirators. Enforcement coordinated for tomorrow morning. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Our evidence collection was nearly complete, warrants were being finalized, and enforcement teams were preparing for coordinated action. All I needed to do was maintain my cover for a few more hours, extracting final pieces of information while keeping Nathan's suspicions dormant. Over dinner, I carefully led the conversation toward his business trip scheduled for the coming weekend, a trip I now knew was meant to finalize arrangements with Hargrove after my documentation was processed. "Tell me more about this Singapore conference," I prompted innocently. "Perhaps I could join you after our Positano visit." Nathan's momentary hesitation was nearly imperceptible before he smoothly fabricated details about a non-existent investment symposium. Each lie was another strand in the evidence web we were weaving around him. After dinner, Nathan suggested a nightcap on our terrace, his manner relaxed yet watchful. I maintained my performance of an unsuspecting fiancé while strategically extracting information about his upcoming movements. "I was thinking about the Sullivan estate today," I mentioned casually, sipping the aged bourbon he'd poured. "Their historical documentation is fascinating. Property records dating back to the 1850s Civil War era." Nathan's interest sharpened, though he tried to appear merely curious. "Historical documents? Anything valuable?" "Primarily sentimental. Value," I replied with calculated nonchalance. "Though I suppose some collectors might find them interesting. They're secured in my office." His expression remained neutral, but I noted the slight adjustment in his posture, mentally adding this information to tomorrow's operation with Ryder. "I've been meaning to show you something," I continued, withdrawing an antique key from my pocket. "My grandmother's key to our family's lake house in Maine. I've been thinking we should visit there after the wedding." Nathan's eyes fixed on the key. A key to a property he clearly hadn't known existed. "I didn't realize your family had a place in Maine." "It's not something I talk about much," I explained. "The property has been in a family trust for generations. Very private, very exclusive. Oceanfront access." I watched him recalculate, mentally adjusting his assessment of my assets. The lake house was real, but its value was modest compared to the Beacon Hill home. Still, Nathan's reaction confirmed his fundamental motivation. He viewed me primarily as a collection of assets to be acquired. "We should definitely visit," he agreed, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Perhaps even before the wedding." Throughout the evening, I carefully planted mentions of fictional documents, non-existent safety deposit boxes, and fabricated family heirlooms, creating a trail of misinformation that would keep Nathan and his associates chasing shadows even after our trap closed around them. My phone vibrated silently with updates from our surveillance operation. Ryder is still at the Cambridge facility. Multiple individuals identified entering, exiting. Facial recognition confirming connections to previous fraud cases. Remote access to Nathan's encrypted communications was successful. Evidence of coordination with at least 3 other similar operations targeting professional women with significant property holdings. Nathan excused himself to make a quick business call, stepping inside while I remained on the terrace. Through our surveillance system, Kyle confirmed he was contacting Hargrove, updating him on the document acquisition and adjusting tomorrow's timeline. When Nathan returned, he carried a small velvet box. "I've been saving this for the right moment," he explained, presenting me with a diamond bracelet that perfectly matched my engagement ring. "Consider it an early wedding gift." I allowed him to fasten it around my wrist, suppressing my revulsion at his touch. The bracelet was exquisite and almost certainly purchased with proceeds from previous victims. I would later learn it had belonged to Melissa Camden, the Chicago executive whose life Nathan had destroyed before targeting me. "It's beautiful," I murmured, knowing the recording devices in my earrings captured the moment he placed stolen property on my wrist. Another charge to add to his growing list of offenses. As midnight approached, Nathan grew increasingly affectionate, suggesting we turn in early with unmistakable implications. The thought of maintaining my charade through physical intimacy made my skin crawl, but I was saved by another urgent message on his phone. "I need to handle this," he apologized, frowning at his screen. "Market fluctuations in Asian trading. Give me 30 minutes. "Take your time," I replied, suppressing my relief. I have some briefs to review anyway. When he retreated to his office, I messaged Kyle. Status update? His response was immediate. All evidence secured. Federal agents maintain surveillance on the Cambridge facility. 8 individuals now identified in conspiracy. Judge Richardson finalizing warrants for coordinated morning raids. Everything was proceeding according to plan. By tomorrow afternoon, Nathan's entire operation would be dismantled, his co-conspirators arrested, his assets frozen, and his freedom forfeit. In our bedroom, I prepared for sleep with mechanical precision, my mind cataloging final preparations. Though I maintained outward calm, inwardly I acknowledged the complex emotions swirling beneath my strategic focus: grief for the relationship I'd believed was real, rage at the calculated betrayal, and cold determination to ensure justice was served completely. Nathan finally joined me after midnight, sliding into bed with practiced ease, his arm draping possessively across my waist. I regulated my breathing to feign sleep while remaining acutely aware of his proximity. "I love you," he whispered in the darkness. One final performance for the woman he believed remained fooled by his elaborate charade. Through narrowly opened eyes, I watched him check his phone one last time before setting it aside, the screen briefly illuminating his face, revealing an expression I'd never seen before: cold, calculating, utterly devoid of the warmth he typically affected in my presence. This was Nathan's true face, the predator beneath the charming facade. In the stillness of our bedroom, surrounded by luxury items purchased with the proceeds of his previous victims, I mentally rehearsed tomorrow's sequence of events. Federal agents would arrest Ryder and his associates at the Cambridge facility at precisely 8 a.m. Simultaneously, Treasury Department officials would freeze all accounts connected to Hargrove's operation. Meanwhile, Nathan would be arrested while attempting to access my office files, caught in the act of perpetrating fraud against not just me, but my clients. By mid-morning, his entire operation would collapse like a house of cards, each carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of irrefutable evidence. His criminal associates would race to save themselves by providing testimony against him. His stolen assets would be identified, cataloged, and restored to their rightful owners, and I would be there to witness it all, the architect of his complete and inescapable downfall. As Nathan's breathing deepened in sleep beside me, I allowed myself a moment of grim satisfaction. Tomorrow would be the final act in our 2-year performance, though only one of us knew the true ending that awaited. I woke before dawn, carefully extracting myself from Nathan's sleeping form. In the bathroom, I prepared for the day with meticulous attention, selecting a slate gray Chanel suit that projected authority and composure. Today's outfit wasn't just professional attire, it was armor. Nathan stirred as I finished applying my makeup, watching me through half-lidded eyes. "Early court appearance?" "The Sullivan matter," I confirmed, securing my diamond earrings with their hidden recording technology. "Judge Richardson requested an 8 a.m. chambers conference." His expression flickered momentarily, Amelia's involvement clearly unsettling him, before he manufactured a supportive smile. "Need me to drive you? I could rearrange my morning." "Calls." "No need," I replied, fastening my watch. "Maddie's picking me up. We're having breakfast first." This fabrication served 2 purposes: preventing Nathan from accompanying me and establishing that someone expected my presence elsewhere, a standard safety protocol when dealing with potentially dangerous individuals. Nathan rose, moving to embrace me from behind, his reflection in the mirror, the picture of devoted fiancé. "Good luck today. I'm thinking Positano reservations for next Monday. I could make some calls this morning." I turned in his arms, studying his face one final time, the face that had convinced me of his sincerity for 2 years. "That sounds perfect." As we parted in our foyer, Nathan kissed me with practiced tenderness. "Love you. See you tonight for celebration dinner." I smiled with equal inauthenticity. Looking forward to it. The moment I entered the elevator, I activated secure communication protocols on my phone, messaging Kyle. Departing residence now. Target remains inside. Operation status? His response came immediately. All teams in position. Federal agents surrounding Cambridge facility. Office security in place. Surveillance active on all subjects. In the parking garage, I bypassed my usual vehicle for the nondescript sedan Kyle had arranged. Within minutes, I was en route to the command center established in a federal building downtown, where Amelia, Rachel, and key law enforcement officials awaited my arrival. Final briefing in progress, Amelia greeted me, gesturing toward the central tactical display where multiple surveillance feeds showed our various targets. Nathan sent a coded confirmation to Ryder minutes ago, Kyle explained, joining us at the command table. They're proceeding as planned. The operations room hummed with controlled activity as federal agents, cybersecurity specialists, and financial crimes investigators coordinated their respective responsibilities. On the main screen, Nathan appeared in our brownstone, dressing hurriedly after receiving an encrypted message from Ryder. They believe they have a 90-minute window while you're in court, Kyle explained. Facial recognition has identified 3 additional associates arriving at the Cambridge facility. Treasury Department confirms 2 have direct ties to Hargrove organization. I studied the tactical display showing real-time positions of all surveillance teams and law enforcement units. Timeline confirmation? Nathan will leave for your office in approximately 20 minutes, Kyle replied. Ryder is dispatching 2 associates to meet him there. Meanwhile, primary document processing continues at the Cambridge warehouse. Rachel approached with an update from the Treasury Department. Hargrove himself has arrived in Boston, landed at a private airfield 30 minutes ago, currently en route to the Liberty Hotel for what they believe is the final transaction approval. This development exceeded our expectations. Having Hargrove personally present would elevate the case from fraud and money laundering to potential RICO charges, transforming a serious case into a major federal prosecution. Adjust the operation parameters, I instructed. We need surveillance coverage at the Liberty immediately. Amelia nodded to a federal agent who immediately began coordinating additional resources. Treasury Department is dispatching a specialized team. This significantly expands our operation scope. For the next 15 minutes, I reviewed final preparations, with each team leader ensuring every aspect of our complex countermove was synchronized. On surveillance monitors, we watched Nathan leave our building, enter his Tesla, and begin driving toward my office building. All units confirm ready status, announced the FBI tactical commander. Authorization to proceed awaits your signal. Judge Richardson. Amelia looked to me, a silent acknowledgement that while this was officially a federal operation, the decision to proceed remained mine. This was personal justice as much as legal remedy. I took a deep breath, thinking of Sarah, Donovan, and Melissa Camden, the previous victims who had lost everything to Nathan's predatory scheme. Thinking of my grandmother's portrait, casually stolen as a profitable afterthought. Thinking of 2 years spent with a man who had viewed our entire relationship as nothing more than an elaborate con. Proceed, I authorized, my voice steady. Throughout the operations center, a coordinated cascade of activity commenced. On multiple screens, we watched as federal agents simultaneously converged on the Cambridge warehouse, Nathan's position near my office, and the Liberty Hotel where Hargrove had just checked in. Target 1 entering your office building, reported the surveillance coordinator, accompanied by 2 unidentified males matching Ryder associate profiles. Team in position, came another update. Warehouse perimeter secured. Liberty team. Reports visual confirmation of Hargrove and executive suite. 2 known associates present. The operation unfolded with military precision. At precisely 8:17 a.m., federal agents executed coordinated raids at all 3 locations simultaneously. Through live feeds, we watched as Nathan was apprehended in The act of attempting to access my office with falsified credentials, his expression of shock when confronted by armed federal agents captured in high definition, the moment he realized his carefully constructed world was imploding. "All primary targets in custody," confirmed the tactical commander 7 minutes later. "No casualties, no collateral damage. Evidence recovery proceeding at all locations." Rachel turned to me, professional satisfaction evident in her expression. "Preliminary inventory from the Cambridge facility confirms recovery of all documentation removed from your Beacon Hill home yesterday. Additionally, they've located files appearing to belong to at least 7 other victims." I nodded, emotions carefully controlled as I watched the simultaneous operations conclude successfully on the tactical displays. Nathan's 2-year scheme had been dismantled in less than 20 minutes of coordinated law enforcement action. "What happens now?" I asked Amelia, watching as Nathan was escorted to a federal vehicle, his hands cuffed behind his back. "Now," she replied, with grim satisfaction, "we build the most comprehensive fraud, identity theft, and money laundering case this jurisdiction has ever seen." The federal building's interview observation room offered perfect sightlines to Nathan's interrogation through one-way glass. For nearly 3 hours, I watched as he transitioned through textbook stages of denial, anger, bargaining, and finally, calculating cooperation. "He's attempting to minimize," noted Special Agent Rivera, the lead investigator assigned to Nathan's case, claiming he was merely an unwitting participant in Hargrove's operation. I studied Nathan's body language as he spoke with federal prosecutors, the subtle tells I'd learned to recognize during our relationship now glaringly obvious, the slight adjustment of his cuffs when fabricating details, the momentary eye shift, when constructing timelines, the practiced sincerity I'd once mistaken for genuine emotion. "He's building a narrative where he's another victim," I observed. "Classic manipulation strategy." Rivera nodded appreciatively at my assessment. "Unfortunately for Mr. Wells, we've already interviewed Ryder. Their stories have critical contradictions." At noon, Amelia joined us with updates from the parallel operations. "Hargrove is maintaining silence, but his associates are competing to offer testimony. Treasury has frozen over $35 million in connected assets across 12 jurisdictions. And the Beacon Hill documentation?" I asked. "Evidence processing continues, but preliminary findings exceed expectations. They've identified documentation from 9 separate fraud operations targeting professional women across 3 states. The pattern is consistent: professional women with significant property holdings, minimal family connections, high-value client portfolios." My phone vibrated with a message from Kyle. "Beacon Hill documentation fully recovered. Grandmother's portrait located in Ryder's vehicle. All items being processed as evidence, but can be returned within 72 hours. Relief washed through me, tempered by the knowledge that while my property would be restored, the violation of my home and trust couldn't be so easily remedied. "We've connected Patterson to 3 other paralegals at different firms," Rivera continued, updating the evidence board. "They've been facilitating similar documentation fraud for at least 5 years. Rachel entered with a thick binder of financial records. Treasury Department completed preliminary analysis of the money trails. Nathan personally received approximately $3.8 million from previous operations. Most was laundered through shell companies before being reinvested in legitimate businesses, including the venture capital firm where he claimed to work." I noted the final piece clicking into place. His entire professional identity was constructed using proceeds from previous victims. In the interrogation room, Nathan's demeanor had shifted to pragmatic cooperation as federal prosecutors outlined the evidence against him. The man who had charmed me for 2 years was methodically bartering information in exchange for consideration, offering details about Hargrove's organization, identifying co-conspirators, detailing operational methods. "Classic narcissistic response," observed Dr. Harris, the FBI psychological consultant. "No genuine remorse, just strategic adaptation to maximize personal advantage. By mid-afternoon, the evidence recovery teams had photographed, cataloged, and secured all documentation taken from my Beacon Hill home. Additionally, they had identified financial records connecting Nathan to his previous victims, Sarah Donovan and Melissa Camden, along with evidence suggesting at least 4 other women had been targeted but escaped before operations completed. "We've located Melissa Camden," Rachel reported, referring to Nathan's Chicago victim. "Treasury Department is preparing to unfreeze assets they've identified as rightfully hers. She's being contacted about providing testimony." The implications extended beyond just criminal charges. With federal authorities involved and connection to international money laundering established, civil asset recovery became significantly more feasible. Women who had previously lost everything might actually recover substantial portions of their stolen property. At 3, I met briefly with Nathan's defense attorney, a federal public defender assigned temporarily until private counsel could be arranged. The contrast between this harried public servant and the high-powered legal representation Nathan had always bragged about accessing was a stark illustration of how completely his facade had collapsed. "My client is interested in discussing cooperation. Parameters," the attorney began awkwardly. "That would be between your client and federal prosecutors," I replied coolly. "I'm here strictly as a victim providing evidence." "He specifically requested to speak with you," the attorney continued. "He believes there are personal matters that might facilitate resolution." Amelia, who had accompanied me as both federal judge and personal support, interjected firmly. "Any communication with Ms. Harrington will occur only through formal channels, with full recording and appropriate protections in place. Your client's history of manipulation and psychological coercion makes informal contact inappropriate." By late afternoon, federal prosecutors had outlined preliminary charges against Nathan: wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, conspiracy, and racketeering. The combined charges carried potential sentences exceeding 30 years. With Hargrove's organization now implicated, additional charges related to international financial crimes remained pending. "They've offered him a cooperation deal," Rivera informed me. 20 years with possibility of reduction to 15 in exchange for complete testimony against Hargrove and all associates. As evening approached, I returned to my Beacon Hill home, accompanied by Kyle and a security team. The house had been processed as a crime scene, with evidence technicians having documented every aspect of Nathan and Ryder's activities. Yellow evidence markers still dotted locations where they had removed or tampered with documentation. I moved through rooms that had been in my family for generations, cataloging violated spaces, disturbed belongings, compromised sanctuaries. In my grandmother's study, I paused before the empty space where her portrait had hung, a visceral reminder of how thoroughly Nathan had betrayed every aspect of trust. "The portrait will be returned tomorrow," Kyle assured me. "All your documentation is secure. The house remains legally yours. It never actually transferred." I nodded, appreciating his attempt at comfort while knowing that legal restoration couldn't address the deeper violation. Nathan hadn't just attempted to steal my property. He had systematically exploited my trust, manipulated my affection, and weaponized intimacy for financial gain. "Security systems have been upgraded," Kyle continued practically. "Complete surveillance, coverage, enhanced access protocols, direct connection to federal monitoring, practical measures for moving forward, necessary steps toward reclaiming my space and security." Yet standing in my grandmother's violated study, I acknowledged the parallel process required: rebuilding internal security that had been just as systemically compromised as my home. The federal building's interview observation room offered perfect sightlines to Nathan's interrogation through one-way glass. For nearly 3 hours, I watched as he transitioned through textbook stages of denial, anger, bargaining, and finally calculating cooperation. "He's attempting to minimize," noted Special Agent Rivera, the lead investigator assigned to Nathan's case. claiming he was merely an unwitting participant in Hargrove's operation. I studied Nathan's body language as he spoke with federal prosecutors, the subtle tells I'd learned to recognize during our relationship now glaringly obvious. The slight adjustment of his cuffs when fabricating details, the momentary eye shift. When constructing timelines, the practiced sincerity I'd once mistaken for genuine emotion. He's building a narrative where he's another victim, I observed. Classic manipulation strategy. Rivera nodded appreciatively at my assessment. Unfortunately, for Mr. Wells, we've already interviewed Ryder. Their stories have critical contradictions. At noon, Amelia joined us with updates from the parallel operations. Hargrove is maintaining silence, but his associates are competing to offer testimony. Treasury has frozen over $35 million in connected assets across 12 jurisdictions. And the Beacon Hill documentation? I asked. Evidence processing continues, but preliminary findings exceed expectations. They've identified documentation from 9 separate fraud operations targeting professional women across 3 states. The pattern is consistent. Professional women with significant property holdings, minimal family connections, high-value client portfolios. My phone vibrated with a message from Kyle. Beacon Hill documentation fully recovered. Grandmother's portrait located in Ryder's vehicle. All items being processed as evidence, but can be returned within 72 hours. Relief washed through me, tempered by the knowledge that while my property would be restored, the violation of my home and trust couldn't be so easily remedied. We've connected Patterson to 3 other paralegals at different firms, Rivera continued, updating the evidence board. They've been facilitating similar documentation fraud for at least 5 years. Rachel entered with a thick binder of financial records. Treasury Department completed preliminary analysis of the money trails. Nathan personally received approximately $3.8 million from previous operations. Most was laundered through shell companies before being reinvested in legitimate businesses, including the venture capital firm where he claimed to work. I noted the final piece clicking into place. His entire professional identity was constructed using proceeds from previous victims. In the interrogation room, Nathan's demeanor had shifted to pragmatic cooperation as federal prosecutors outlined the evidence against him. The man who had charmed me for 2 years was methodically bartering information in exchange for consideration, offering details about Hargrove's organization, identifying co-conspirators, detailing operational methods. Classic narcissistic response, observed Dr. Harris, the FBI psychological consultant. No genuine remorse, just strategic adaptation to maximize personal advantage. By mid-afternoon, the evidence recovery teams had photographed, cataloged, and secured all documentation taken from my Beacon Hill home. Additionally, they had identified financial records connecting Nathan to his previous victims, Sarah Donovan and Melissa Camden, along with evidence suggesting at least 4 other women had been targeted, but escaped before operations completed. We've located Melissa Camden, Rachel reported, referring to Nathan's Chicago victim. Treasury Department is preparing to unfreeze assets they've identified as rightfully hers. She's being contacted about providing testimony. The implications extended beyond just criminal charges. With federal authorities involved in connection to international money laundering established, civil asset recovery became significantly more feasible. Women who had previously lost everything might actually recover substantial portions of their stolen property. As evening approached, I requested a moment alone with Nathan. After consultation between Amelia, Rachel, and the federal prosecutors, they agreed with specific parameters. The interview would be recorded, monitored by federal agents, and preceded by clear advisement that nothing said could affect the charges against him. I entered the interview room at precisely 5:00 p.m., Nathan's expression registering momentary surprise before he manufactured a careful blend of contrition and affection. "Olivia," he began, rising slightly before the guard motioned him to remain seated. "Thank you for—" "This isn't a personal visit," I interrupted. placing my briefcase on the table between us. I'm here to ensure you understand exactly what's happening and what comes next. His expression shifted, calculation evident behind his eyes. They're making this into something it isn't. If you'd just let me explain. No explanations, I stated calmly. Just facts. The federal government has documented evidence of your involvement in at least 9 separate fraud operations targeting professional women across multiple states. They've traced financial connections between you and Victor Hargrove that implicate you in international money laundering. They've recovered documentation of your elaborate planning to target me specifically, including psychological profiles and vulnerability assessments. I opened my briefcase, removing a single photograph. The surveillance image of Nathan removing my grandmother's portrait from the Beacon Hill home. This isn't about misunderstandings or explanations, Nathan. This is about systematic predation. About weaponizing intimacy for financial gain. His composure faltered briefly. Olivia, whatever they've told you, they haven't told me anything I didn't already know, I replied evenly. I'm the one who built this case. I'm the reason you're sitting here right now. Complete comprehension dawned on his face. You knew. Not from the beginning, I acknowledged. But I figured it out before you could complete your operation. While you were playing me, I was building the most comprehensive fraud and money laundering case the Boston federal prosecutor has seen in a decade. Nathan leaned back, reassessing me completely. The charming facade dissolved entirely, revealing the calculating operator beneath. How long? He asked, professional curiosity momentarily overriding self-preservation. I noticed the first inconsistencies 3 weeks ago. The small test transactions from your shadow accounts were sloppy. By last week, I had documented your entire operation, including connections to Hargrove and your previous victims. That's when I implemented the counterplan. A flicker of reluctant admiration crossed his face. The Sullivan case delay, the accelerated wedding timeline pressure, the preservation board intervention, that was all you. Every single piece, I confirmed. While you were stealing my family documentation, federal agents were monitoring your every move. While you were planning Phase 2 targeting my law office, I was coordinating with the Treasury to hijack your offshore accounts. The honeypot financial structures you encountered weren't random glitches. They were specifically designed to trap you. Nathan studied me with new awareness, seeing me truly for perhaps the first time. I underestimated you. Your fundamental mistake. You targeted me because I fit your algorithm. Successful professional, significant property holdings, high value, client access. But you failed to recognize that my specific expertise made me uniquely equipped to dismantle your entire operation. So what happens now? He asked, a pragmatic assessment replacing manipulation attempts. You're facing federal charges carrying sentences totaling approximately 30 years. With Hargrove's organization implicated, RICO considerations may extend that further. Complete asset forfeiture is already in process. The Tesla, the Rolex, collection, the designer wardrobe, the venture capital stake. Everything purchased with proceeds from criminal activity. I stood, gathering my materials. The federal prosecutor is preparing a cooperation agreement, 20 years with possibility of reduction to 15 in exchange for comprehensive testimony against Hargrove and all associates. I suggest you take it. As I prepared to leave, Nathan made one final attempt. Was any of it real for you? I paused at the door, considering the question not from emotional impulse but clear-eyed assessment. For me, yes. That's the fundamental asymmetry of your operation, Nathan. Your victims experienced authentic connection while you executed tactical manipulation. The emotional reality was entirely one-sided. His expression tightened, the first genuine reaction I'd seen. You don't know everything about me. I know enough. I know you've destroyed lives for profit. I know you've exploited trust and weaponized intimacy. I know you selected me as a target rather than a partner. That's all I need to know. As I exited, Agent Rivera met me in the hallway. You did well there. Hit all the key points without providing any actionable information he could use for bargaining. He'll take the cooperation agreement, I noted, watching Nathan through the one-way glass as he processed our encounter. His survival instinct is too strong for futile resistance. The next morning, I met with Sarah Donovan for the first time, the Seattle architect whose life Nathan had systematically dismantled before targeting Melissa Camden and eventually me. We sat in Amelia's private chambers, the federal judge having arranged the meeting as part of the expanding case development. Sarah appeared both fragile and resilient, a woman who had endured catastrophic betrayal, yet somehow preserved her essential self. Her once thriving architectural practice had collapsed along with her financial security, yet she carried herself with quiet dignity. "I never thought I'd see justice for what he did," she admitted, hands wrapped around a coffee mug as if seeking warmth. "After the fire destroyed my documentation, after my legal challenges failed, I accepted that he'd won, that he would simply move on to the next victim." "But you documented everything," I noted, reviewing the meticulous records she'd maintained. "Even after conventional legal avenues closed. Your detailed accounting of all that happened became crucial evidence in our case." A small smile touched her lips. "My grandmother was a bookkeeper during the Depression. She always said, 'Keep records even when no one's asking to see them.' I never expected they'd become federal evidence. They've identified approximately $1.2 million of your assets in Hargrove-connected accounts," Rachel explained gently. "The Treasury Department believes they can recover most of it through civil forfeiture now that the criminal enterprise has been documented." Sarah's hands trembled slightly. "It won't bring back my firm. 5 years of my career essentially erased. My professional reputation has been decimated. But it prevents him from doing this to anyone else," I observed. "Your documentation helped us connect the pattern across multiple victims." Sarah studied me with a mixture of curiosity and compassion. "How are you handling it? The betrayal?" The question caught me off guard, a personal inquiry amid legal proceedings. I considered my response carefully. "I'm focusing on the legal dimensions," I replied honestly. "The emotional processing will come later, when the case is complete." Sarah nodded in understanding. "Compartmentalization is a survival skill. I did the same at first. Just be prepared. When you finally allow yourself to feel it all, it hits like a tsunami." Her insight carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. Unlike prosecutors and investigators who understood the case intellectually, Sarah comprehended its emotional devastation from lived experience. "Any advice?" I asked, abandoning professional distance for a moment of authentic connection with someone who truly understood. "Document everything, just like your legal cases," she offered without hesitation. "The good moments that were real for you, the red flags you missed, the manipulations you later identified. Creating a coherent narrative helps prevent him from continuing to control your story." Her counsel resonated deeply, approaching emotional recovery with the same methodical thoroughness I'd applied to building the legal case. "We're establishing a victims' alliance," Rachel explained, outlining a support structure being developed in parallel with the criminal prosecution. "Connecting women targeted by this operation for mutual support, shared legal resources, and coordinated asset recovery efforts." "I'd like to be part of that," Sarah replied without hesitation. "Not just for what I might gain, but for what I can offer others coming after me." As our meeting concluded, Sarah hesitated at the door. "One more thing," she said quietly. "Don't let him become the defining chapter of your story. That's what he wants. To remain central to your narrative even after he's gone. The most powerful recovery is building something he can't touch or claim credit for influencing." Her insight carried profound truth. The ultimate freedom would come not just from legal victory, but from reclaiming my narrative entirely. That afternoon, I returned to the brownstone Nathan and I had shared to collect my personal belongings. Kyle accompanied me, along with a security team Amelia had insisted upon given the expanding case implications. The space felt simultaneously familiar and foreign, the setting for an elaborate performance that had stretched over 2 years. "We've swept for surveillance devices," Kyle confirmed as we entered. "The property is clean." I moved through rooms that had once represented a shared future, now revealed as elaborate stage settings for Nathan's long con. In the master bedroom, I efficiently sorted personal items from joint acquisitions, separating what was truly mine from the artifice of our constructed life. "His attorney has waived all claims to personal property," Kyle noted, supervising as the security team documented each item removed. "Federal asset seizure covers everything purchased during your relationship." In the guest room closet, I discovered something unexpected, a locked case I'd never seen before. Kyle's security team expertly opened it, revealing a cache of identity documentation, passports, driver's licenses, credit cards, all bearing Nathan's photograph but different names. "Contingency identities," Kyle observed, immediately photographing and cataloging the discovery. "Escape plan documentation. This significantly strengthens the premeditation evidence." The finding confirmed what I'd already understood intuitively. Nathan had always planned for potential discovery. Every aspect of our relationship had included calculation of risk and preparation for strategic exit. In what had been our shared office, I located photo albums chronicling our relationship, carefully curated visual documentation of fabricated happiness, vacation photos, holiday celebrations, candid moments that had seemed genuine, but now revealed themselves as tactical documentation, establishing relationship legitimacy. "Do you want these?" Kyle asked, indicating the albums. I considered the question, weighing sentimental impulse against clear-eyed assessment. "Document them for evidence, then dispose of them," I decided. They were never real, just props in his performance. As we completed the inventory and removal process, I paused in the foyer, taking a final look at the space that had been the setting for so much calculated deception. Unlike my Beacon Hill home, which represented authentic family, legacy-deserving reclamation, this brownstone held no true meaning beyond its role as theatrical backdrop. "I won't be returning here," I informed Kyle, handing him the keys. "My attorney will handle the property disposition once the federal case concludes." Outside, afternoon sunlight illuminated Boston's historic streets, the city continuing its normal rhythms despite the seismic disruption of my personal landscape. I felt a curious lightness as we departed. Not happiness exactly, but liberation from artifice, from the constant subtle manipulations that had formed the background radiation of life with Nathan. "Where to now?" Kyle asked as we loaded the last of my personal belongings. "The Beacon Hill house," I replied without hesitation. "It's time to reclaim my actual home." By early evening, I sat in my grandmother's study at the Beacon Hill house, the space now restored and secured through comprehensive new protection systems. Federal evidence technicians had completed their work, returning my family documentation with meticulous care. The portrait above the fireplace had been rehung, minor damage from Nathan's careless handling professionally repaired. Rachel arrived with final case updates before tomorrow's preliminary hearing. "Nathan's accepted the cooperating witness arrangement," she confirmed. 20 years with possibility of reduction to 15 based on testimony value. He's already providing detailed information on Hargrove's international operation. "And Thornton?" I asked, referring to the developer who had planned to demolish my family home. "Facing separate charges for permit fraud and attempting to bribe city officials," Rachel reported. "Beth Thornton has been tremendously helpful in documenting his pattern of circumventing preservation regulations." The Patterson and Wilson situation. Catherine. "Morrison has been ruthlessly efficient. Both terminated from Morrison and Frost. Both reported to the Bar Association for ethics violations. The firm is establishing a victim compensation fund for clients affected by their fraud facilitation." I nodded, appreciating the comprehensive response across multiple fronts. What had begun as defense of my personal property had expanded into systematic dismantling of an entire criminal network, each component now facing appropriate consequences. "What about Stephanie Patterson?" I asked, remembering the real estate agent who had shown my home to prospective buyers. "Indicted this afternoon," Rachel confirmed. "The evidence from your surveillance system provided irrefutable documentation of her knowing participation in the fraud conspiracy." As night fell over Boston, I moved to the bay window overlooking the garden, the same perspective that had framed generations of Harrington family moments. The city lights twinkled beyond ancient trees, a view that connected past to present while offering perspective on recent events. My phone chimed with a message from Kyle. "Security systems fully operational. Remote monitoring established. Property completely secure." The practical protections provided the necessary foundation, yet I recognized they addressed only physical security. The deeper restoration involved reclaiming not just my home but my capacity for trust, a more complex reconstruction project with no technological shortcuts. Amelia arrived just after 9, bringing dinner and the steadying presence that had anchored me through the turbulent weeks of investigation and enforcement action. "How are you?" she asked simply as we settled in the kitchen, the heart of the home where my grandmother had taught me to bake bread, to review legal briefs, to balance professional excellence with personal grace. "Processing," I replied honestly. "Compartmentalizing. The emotional dimensions until the case concludes." Amelia nodded in understanding. "A necessary approach for now, but eventually—" "I know," I acknowledged. "Sarah Donovan warned me about the tsunami effect when compartmentalization ends. She would understand better than most," Amelia observed. "Though your situations differ in crucial ways. You stopped Nathan before he completed his operation. You've secured your assets and professional standing. You've built an airtight case ensuring he faces significant consequences." "The practical dimensions are resolved," I agreed, "but the personal betrayal remains. And will take time to process fully," Amelia confirmed. "But you have resources Sarah didn't. Professional support, financial security, a strong network of people who understand exactly what happened." We completed dinner amid discussion of tomorrow's hearing procedures, the comfort of the legal process providing a framework for navigating forward. As Amelia prepared to leave, she paused in the foyer, her expression reflecting both professional approval and personal pride. "Your grandmother would be extraordinarily proud," she noted, gesturing to the house around us. "Not just that you protected her home, but how you did it, with strategic brilliance, unwavering determination, and commitment to comprehensive justice." After she departed, I moved through the quiet rooms of my ancestral home, each space now holding layered meaning, family legacy, recent violation, and emerging reclamation. In the study, I opened my grandmother's antique secretary desk, now reinstalled in its proper position after federal evidence processing. Inside, I carefully arranged the rescued family documentation, property deeds, historical correspondence, architectural drawings, personal journals, each item representing continuity that Nathan had attempted to sever. Alongside these historical materials, I placed a new addition, the federal case file documenting how her granddaughter had protected this legacy against modern predation. Tomorrow would bring formal proceedings, public revelation of the fraud, network, and the beginning of systematic justice for all affected by Nathan's operation. The legal mechanisms would work their way toward resolution over coming months, each court appearance and filing bringing closure to particular dimensions of the betrayal. But tonight, in the quiet sanctuary of the home he had failed to steal, I acknowledged a truth beyond legal remedies. Nathan had targeted me because I fit a predatory algorithm, not because of who I actually was. The relationship I had experienced as genuine connection had been, for him, merely tactical methodology for asset acquisition. Yet in that asymmetry lay a peculiar power. While he had seen me as nothing more than a collection of exploitable resources, I had recognized him fully, had identified the predator beneath the performance, had mapped his methodology, and had architected his complete downfall. In targeting a woman whose professional life centered on protecting historic legacies from modern exploitation, Nathan had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He had selected as victim the one person perfectly positioned to dismantle his entire operation. The very expertise that made me attractive as target had enabled me to become his most dangerous adversary. Standing at the window of my reclaimed home, I felt the first stirrings of what would eventually become healing, not forgetting or minimizing, but integrating this chapter into a larger narrative where betrayal catalyzed transformation rather than defining my story. Nathan had attempted to erase my connection to this house, to my family legacy, to my own professional power. Instead, he had inadvertently strengthened all three, creating a resolution that would protect not just me but countless others from similar predation. Tomorrow, the formal justice process would continue, with Nathan's cooperation purchase aimed at minimizing consequences he couldn't escape entirely. But the true victory had already been secured, not just in rescued property or legal proceedings, but in the fundamental reclamation of narrative control. The house remained mine. The legacy continued, and the woman he had underestimated now stood as architect of his complete and inescapable downfall. 1 year after Nathan's sentencing, I stood at the podium in the University of Boston Law School's largest lecture hall, facing a room filled with attentive law students, practicing attorneys, and financial security professionals. "The most sophisticated predators don't use force," I began, my voice carrying confidently through the space. "They use trust. They weaponize intimacy. They transform connection into methodology for exploitation." The presentation slides behind me displayed key statistics from the Financial Predation Response Initiative, the organization I had founded using a portion of the recovered assets from Nathan and Hargrove's operation. In the past 12 months, we've identified 68 cases following the same pattern across 17 states, I continued. Professional women with significant assets, targeted through elaborate relationship fraud, coupled with sophisticated identity theft and documentation falsification. From the front row, Melissa Camden offered an encouraging nod. After recovering much of her stolen assets, she had joined the initiative as Director of Victim Recovery, bringing her architectural expertise to rebuild not just physical spaces, but psychological safety for those who had experienced similar betrayal. What began as my personal experience with targeted predation has revealed a systematic pattern of exploitation, I explained, advancing to the next slide. Today, we're launching a national awareness campaign along with specific protective protocols for those most vulnerable to these operations. The lecture hall doors opened quietly as Sarah Donovan slipped in, taking a seat in the back row. After providing crucial testimony that helped secure Nathan's conviction, she had gradually rebuilt her architectural practice in Portland, focusing on sustainable restoration of historic properties, reclaiming her professional identity just as she had reclaimed her personal agency. The Harrington Protocol incorporates 3 essential elements, I continued, outlining the comprehensive protection system we had developed. Financial security architecture that creates early warning systems for unauthorized access attempts. Documentation authentication processes that flag potential forgery. And most importantly, connection to immediate legal response networks when warning signs appear. In the audience, Catherine Morrison watched with professional approval. Her firm had become the first major legal practice to implement these protocols, both for their own operations and as client services. The system that had stopped Nathan's fraud operation was now being deployed proactively across the country. Financial predators succeed when victims remain isolated, I emphasized, coming to the heart of my presentation. They count on shame, on professional women's reluctance to acknowledge betrayal, on the fragmentation that allows predatory patterns to remain undetected across jurisdictions. Kyle, seated beside Rachel Cho, nodded in agreement. The security firm he had established with federal grants now operated as the technical backbone of our protection network, providing sophisticated monitoring systems that had already prevented dozens of similar fraud attempts. But what happens when isolation ends, when victims connect, when patterns emerge clearly across cases? I clicked to the final slide, displaying a map of our growing national network. What happens is this: comprehensive protection, coordinated response, and systematic dismantling of predatory operations. As the presentation concluded, Judge Amelia Richardson approached the podium, applause still echoing through the hall. From personal violation to national protection initiative in just 12 months, she observed. You've transformed individual injury into collective remedy. With considerable help, I acknowledged, gesturing to the allies who had made this expansion possible. The most meaningful justice isn't just punishment for wrongdoing, Amelia noted. It's to prevent future harm. What you've built here does both. Later that afternoon, I hosted a small gathering at my Beacon Hill home. Not a formal board meeting, though everyone present served the initiative in official capacity, but rather a moment of reflection as we marked the first anniversary of what had begun as a personal crisis and evolved into a purposeful mission. The Treasury Department confirmed final numbers today, Rachel reported, joining us in the living room that had once been violated by Nathan and his cleaner. Total recovered assets from Hargrove's network exceed $220 million. Approximately $28 million has been returned to identified victims so far. And Nathan, Sarah asked quietly, the only one among us who had experienced the full destructive impact of his operations without the protection our collective response had provided for me. Continuing to cooperate from federal prison, Rachel confirmed. His testimony has directly contributed to 17 additional indictments across Hargrove's network. Still calculating advantage, Kyle observed, even behind bars. But irrelevant beyond the information he provides, I noted, having long since moved past any emotional investment in Nathan's ongoing machinations. His cooperation affects sentencing considerations, nothing more. Melissa raised her glass. To irrelevance, the most fitting consequence for men who sought power through exploitation. As glasses clinked in agreement, I surveyed this gathering of powerful, principled professionals who had transformed individual response into collective protection. What had begun as defense against personal betrayal had evolved into a comprehensive system safeguarding countless others from similar predation. The Boston pilot program expands to 5 additional cities next month, Catherine announced. Early warning protocols implemented at 23 financial institutions, authentication systems adopted by 12 major law firms, immediate response, networks established in every target jurisdiction. And the educational component? Amelia inquired. Awareness seminars scheduled at 15 law schools, 12 business programs, and 8 women's professional organizations, Melissa confirmed. Proactive protection through pattern recognition. As the strategic discussion continued, I moved to the study window overlooking the garden, taking a moment of quiet reflection amid purposeful activity. The Beacon Hill home felt entirely reclaimed now, no longer defined by violation but by the meaningful work emanating from its restored spaces. Sarah joined me by the window, her expression reflecting understanding no academic analysis could provide, the lived experience of having one's life systematically dismantled by calculated betrayal, followed by the arduous process of reclaiming not just property, but personal narrative. You've done remarkable work here, she observed, gesturing to the gathering behind us. Transformed personal trauma into systemic protection. Following your advice, I reminded her. You said the most powerful recovery is building something. He can't touch or claim credit for influencing. She smiled, recognition of shared healing through purposeful action evident in her expression. When my firm collapsed, when I lost everything, I couldn't imagine finding meaning in that experience. Now my new practice incorporates specific security features into every restoration project I design, protection built directly into the architecture. Physical and psychological safety intertwined, I noted, appreciating the elegant integration of professional expertise with personal understanding. Exactly, she agreed. That's the true reclamation, not just recovering what was taken, but creating something more resilient because of what happened. Her insight resonated deeply. The house remained my ancestral home, but its significance had evolved. No longer simply inherited legacy, it now served as foundation for meaningful contribution, headquarters for an initiative protecting others from exploitation Nathan had attempted against me. As the gathering transitioned to dinner, served in the dining room where generations of Harringtons had hosted meaningful discussions, I found myself increasingly aware of how completely this space had been reclaimed. What Nathan had viewed as simply valuable property to be acquired had transformed into the operational center of the very network dismantling operations like his. The federal prosecutor called today, Amelia mentioned as conversation flowed around the antique table. Based on the initiative's identification protocols, they've located 3 previously unknown operations using similar methodology in the Pacific Northwest. Interventions prevented approximately $14 million in potential losses. The pattern recognition algorithm is working, Kyle confirmed. Early warning indicators flagged subtle document authentication issues that typical security systems missed. The algorithm Nathan helped design to identify potential victims, Rachel noted with ironic satisfaction, now repurposed to protect those same women and identify the predators targeting them. The poetic justice wasn't lost on anyone present. The very methodologies developed for exploitation now reconstructed for protection. The targeting system reversed to secure rather than violate. After dinner, as our guests departed with clear action items for the initiative's next phase of expansion, Amelia lingered behind, surveying the home with evident approval. "Your grandmother would be especially proud of this," she observed. "Not just preserving the house, but transforming it into headquarters for meaningful protection of others." "I've been thinking about her recently," I acknowledged, walking with my godmother through rooms that held generations of family history. Particularly how she approached her judicial career, using specific cases to establish broader precedents, creating systemic solutions from individual situations. Following directly in her footsteps, Amelia confirmed, though in ways neither of you could have anticipated. As we paused in the study, my grandmother's portrait seemed to regard us with particular approval, the slight curve of her painted lips suggesting satisfaction at her legacy's evolution. "Have you heard from Nathan?" Amelia asked quietly, the first time in months anyone had mentioned him directly, rather than simply referring to the operational implications of his testimony. "His attorney contacted me about the personal items recovered from the safety deposit box," I replied neutrally, seeking confirmation they were returned properly through evidence processing. "Otherwise, no contact." "And emotionally?" she inquired, her concern encompassing dimensions beyond practical resolution. I considered the question carefully, assessing my internal landscape with the same thoroughness I applied to legal analysis. "I've processed the betrayal," I replied, honestly. Not dismissed or minimized it, but integrated it into a larger narrative where it catalyzed meaningful purpose rather than defining my story. Amelia nodded in understanding. "That's the most authentic healing. Not pretending it didn't happen, but ensuring it doesn't become the controlling narrative of your life." After she departed, I moved through the quiet rooms of my ancestral home, now restored not just to their original condition, but enhanced with subtle security features, physical manifestations of hard-earned wisdom. The house had survived attempted theft, not through mere resistance, but through strategic transformation into something more resilient and purposeful. In my grandmother's study, I opened the antique secretary desk that had once been violated, now containing not just restored family documentation, but evolving records of the initiative's impact, case files documenting intervention, prevention materials expanding awareness, statistical analyses tracking the dismantling of predatory networks across jurisdictions. My phone chimed with a message from Melissa. Treasury confirms additional recovery of Camden firm assets. Restoration begins next month. Thank you for everything. This represented the most meaningful outcome. Not just my reclaimed property, but expanded protection extending to others who might have faced similar predation. What Nathan had tried to destroy had instead become the foundation for his complete obsolescence. The system he had designed for exploitation now reconstructed as an impenetrable shield. Moving to the window overlooking Boston's historic skyline, I reflected on the narrative arc of the past year. From targeted victim to architect of justice, from isolated betrayal to collaborative protection, from personal injury to collective remedy. Nathan had seen only property to be acquired and resources to be exploited. He had failed to recognize the fundamental resilience his targeting algorithm had inadvertently selected. A woman whose professional expertise provided perfect counterbalance to his predatory methodology, whose family connections offered institutional leverage against his network, whose determination ensured that justice would be both personal and systemic. In choosing me as target, he had unwittingly selected his most formidable adversary, someone uniquely positioned to not just defeat his immediate operation, but to dismantle the entire predatory system he represented. The deepest irony remained that in attempting to erase my connection to this house, to my family legacy, to my professional power, Nathan had inadvertently strengthened all three, creating not just personal reclamation, but expanded protection that would render his entire operational methodology obsolete. From the bookshelf, I retrieved my grandmother's journal, opening to an entry from her early days as a judge. Justice in individual cases matters profoundly, but true transformation comes from addressing the systemic vulnerabilities that enable exploitation. Our greatest legacy isn't punishing wrongdoing, but preventing it. As I closed the journal, I acknowledged how completely her wisdom had manifested through my response to betrayal. Nathan had viewed me as merely the next target in his predatory progression. Instead, I had become the architect of a protection network that would eventually render operations like his impossible to execute. He had seen a house to be stolen. I had protected not just my home but countless others from similar violations. He had calculated value in property and assets. I had recognized worth in legacy and purpose. He had weaponized intimacy for exploitation. I had transformed betrayal into protection. In the end, Nathan's most profound miscalculation wasn't underestimating my legal acumen or professional connections. It was failing to understand that in targeting a woman whose identity was rooted in protecting legacies, he had sealed his own destruction and obsolescence. The house remained mine, not just preserved, but transformed into headquarters for meaningful protection extending far beyond its historic walls. And the woman he had tried to destroy had instead become the architect of a system, ensuring that predators like him would find no future victims to exploit. That was the ultimate justice, not just punishment, but prevention, not just personal recovery, but collective protection, not just reclaiming what was mine, but ensuring others would never lose what was theirs. In the quiet of my reclaimed home, this understanding brought not just closure, but purposeful forward momentum. The house Nathan failed to steal had become the foundation for something he could never have anticipated, a legacy of protection that would long outlast the memory of his betrayal. That was a victory worth preserving, a foundation no predator could ever undermine. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.